Hi, I'm Brian Stokes. I am the Library Director of the Falmouth Public Library, and I've been working here at the Falmouth Public Library since September 2022 when I became the Assistant Library Director. At the time, Linda Collins was the Library Director. I grew up in Shreveport, Louisiana, which most people don't realize because I don't have much of a Southern accent. But I did, and went to college at Penn State University, which is far from Shreveport, Louisiana, sort of by design. I wanted a different experience than the Deep South. I majored in journalism at Penn State. I loved newspapers as a kid. A big sort of memory of mine that actually ties into public libraries is my brother, who's a few years younger than me, had to go see a tutor at the public library in the town across the river from where I grew up, in a town called Bossier City. And Bossier had a pretty new public library at the time. And so I was in my teens, but I probably would have valued having some time at home by myself without my little brother and my mom around. But I would tag along on those trips over to the library because they would have copies of the Sunday New York Times there. And the Sunday New York Times is massive, right? It's a huge, chunk of newspaper. And I just was amazed at how big this paper was and how much there was in it. And even the arts section, which I was really interested in at the time, was so much bigger than even my hometown newspaper. And so I just really loved the access to the world and to New York City, which I had always sort of put on a pedestal as this place that must be a lot better than Shreveport, Louisiana. Not that there's anything wrong with Shreveport, but so I don't know, I connected with newspapers through that, and I went to Penn State and just thought maybe journalism would be the way to go. I graduated from Penn State and started writing for the local newspaper in State College, Pennsylvania, and did that for a little while, but wanted to move to New York, so I did. And in 2006 I got a job as a copy editor for a trade publication company that covered the energy industry. Soon I got promoted into an assistant editor role and also as a reporter, and I was covering crude oil tanker markets, which was not something I knew much about. And so as I started to learn about this, I sort of felt like I was carving out a path that I wasn't sure I wanted to be the path that I was on in my life. I was writing about this very sort of granular thing that wasn't very interesting to most people, wasn't really interesting to me, to be honest with you. And most importantly, I was writing about something that I always felt like the audience I was writing for knew more about than I did, which is a very stressful place to find yourself in. So I kind of just thought about what I was doing and where I was going and what kind of career I wanted to have. And I had a friend who was pursuing her master's degree in library and information science at the time. And as a former copy editor, she would often give me her papers to read before she would turn them in. And so I thought this might be something I would be interested in. So I went to Pratt Institute, got my master's degree in library and information science. And while I was in school, sort of did two very impactful experiences in that I interned at Columbia University for a year, and then I also started volunteering in New York Public Library's Correctional Services program. I heard about this program just through a classmate of mine who did a report on it, reached out to the guy who ran it, and he invited me to come see what it's all about. And pretty soon I found myself responding to letters from folks who were incarcerated throughout New York City, throughout the state of New York, and even across the country. When I got out of library school, it was a pretty tough job market, so I strung together a few part-time jobs, one of them doing correctional services outreach for NYPL at Rikers Island, also at a federal prison in Brooklyn, while also working as an academic library at a small college called Mercy College. Pretty quickly I sort of realized that my passion lies in public service and working with the public. So I did the jail stuff for a while, but eventually got an opportunity to become a full-time young adult librarian at a branch of NYPL in Midtown Manhattan. did that for a few years, then an opportunity to do the same thing, be a YA librarian at a really beautiful, amazing library in Greenwich Village opened up. So I took that opportunity and did that for a few more years before I got an opportunity to manage a branch of NYPL down in Lower Manhattan, right by City Hall. And so I really loved being a YA librarian, but I love supporting staff even more. So I think that's where I sort of found my passion for management. And then a few years after that, my wife and I had, started a family. We had 2 young kids, and we started to think, what are we going to do? Are we going to be New Yorkers forever, or do we want to try something different? And the assistant director role was open here in Falmouth, so I applied, and it was a great fit. We immediately just found the town to be a really lovely place, and the kind of place we thought would be great to raise our kids. So here we are. I get to do a lot of really interesting things as the library director here. I act as sort of the liaison for the library administration with the Board of Library Trustees, the Friends of the Falmouth Public Library, the Falmouth Public Library Support Fund, which are all organizations that support the mission of the public library. I also work with town administration because the library is, of course, a municipal entity as well. When Sheriff Buckley was elected in November 2022, it seemed like a good fit for maybe checking in to see if the library could have any sort of role at the correctional facility. And a few months later, we got a meeting, and I went up there and was ready to do anything that they needed me to do or needed the library to do. And on a whim, I brought a copy of a syllabus that I had written for this college-style literature course that I had designed as a book discussion group at a federal prison in Brooklyn. And I brought it out. It was based on sort of post-9/11 American literature, using 9/11 as a lens to explore the American experience and how it had changed in the early 21st century. And I brought it out, and I was just like, I can clean up your library, I can do this. And I gave them the syllabus, and they looked at it, and they're like, do this right now, come do this. And I was like, all right, give me some time. At the time, I was the acting library director here, the assistant director. Our administrative assistant was also retiring, so I had a lot going on. But seeing the enthusiasm that the sheriff and her staff had, I wanted to keep things rolling, so I started going out there and mostly organizing their library. They hadn't had a librarian since the onset of COVID in 2020, and nobody was really even using the library for a long time because of COVID restrictions that basically people couldn't congregate in that space. So the first thing I did was kind of clean it up, get rid of a lot of old books that just looked like nobody would ever want to touch them, water damaged or dirty or whatever. And then organized the shelves, made it look nice, made it look inviting in there. Created a few genre sections, so they didn't have a classics section, which I think is always a good place to start in a library if you don't know what you're looking for. They didn't have a young adult section, and a lot of folks who are incarcerated out there are on the younger side, and you want to make sure that you have materials that appeal to every demographic that you can. So I started doing that, and then a month or two later, I started being able to meet with some of the folks who would come down to the library for education. They would go to class, and then they'd stop at the library for 15 or 20 minutes. Was able to take requests and fill some of those requests through some of the donations that we get here at the library through the Friends organization. And that was really big. We started doing that every week, basically. So one week I would go out and see the guys, and then the next week I'd go out and see the women who are incarcerated out there, because that's a big thing for Sheriff Buckley. She wants to have that equity between the two genders out there. So that really went well. That carried us through the fall, and then in January I really wanted to get started with that programming. So I took that 9/11 sort of class that I designed, which was a big, sprawling thing. But it was for a federal prison where folks are generally in longer. Most of the folks at Barnstable County Correctional Facility are only there for 2.5 years or less. So repackaged it as an 8-week program and did it with a group of guys first. They committed to the whole thing. I supplied the books. They get to keep them. We read Jonathan Franzen's The Corrections, which is one of my favorite books. It's our pre-9/11 book to sort of capture life at the end of the 20th century. We read Netherland by Joseph O'Neill, which is a great book that takes place shortly after 9/11 in Lower Manhattan, and tells sort of the experience of immigrants in the city at the time of 9/11, where there was a real sort of coalescing around, patriotic thought and everything else, and sort of exploring the experience of folks who maybe weren't originally from here. We read The Looming Tower, which is a fantastic piece of nonfiction by Lawrence Wright about the history of Al-Qaeda, and then we close it out with a graphic adaptation, like a comic adaptation of the 9/11 Commission report, which is a really interesting way of looking at a fairly dense government document. We did that with 4 guys. One of them got released during the program, so 3 of them finished it, and it was really amazing. And then we turned around and did it with 6 women. And so, that was just a really great experience and something that I think we want to build on. Looking to September of this year, we're going to be starting a picture book course for parents who are incarcerated at the facility. We're going to have 10 women initially in the program. It's going to be 4 weeks. We have a book that provides a great sort of 360 view of the importance of picture books and how to read them actively and engagingly. And then we're also going to be giving a copy of a book selected by a children's librarian that I'm partnering with on this from the Sturgis Library in Barnstable. And she selected a book called Last Stop on Market Street. And we're going to be giving copies of that to the participants of the program to take home with them. Because it's really important to give people the tools to connect with their families, especially when they've been away for a little while. Just having a book that you can bring home and you're already comfortable with and you can read to a child is such an important way to reconnect, I think, and hopefully reduce recidivism and keep folks out, and keep them with their families. That's really what we're looking for. A book that was really profoundly impactful on me, I mentioned it a couple times now, but I was in my late 20s when I read Jonathan Franzen's The Corrections, and Franzen can be a bit of a literary punching bag these days. He's a very thoughtful guy, but sometimes he can put his foot in his mouth, or he's just sort of representative of maybe what isn't necessarily popular at the moment or whatever in terms of his sort of grandiosity or what he represents. But The Corrections, I think, had a really profound effect on me because, it's about a family, and I read it before I started my own family, but it made me reflect on my relationship with my family and how that experience is something that I think is different for everybody, but also pulls us all together in our own way. I think that it's just a book that really captures the American experience in so many ways that a lot of people can relate to if they give it a chance. It's also really funny, which I think is tough to pull off for a book that tries to really talk about big picture stuff. So to have that humor, I always am trying to put a little humor into everything I can do, or at least keep my sense of humor about me. And so I love the way Franzen pulls off humor. It's also a very accessible, readable book, which I think for literary fiction is something that's admirable. Some of the greats like Thomas Pynchon or even David Foster Wallace, those are writers who, really capture sort of postmodern literary fiction, but some of their work is so dense and sort of hard to get into. And Franzen's writing, for me, is so accessible. It just tells a story. It's I don't know, it's just so easy to dive into, whereas like Pynchon, I have to reread the page 3 times in order to sort of understand what he's talking about. I have this theory that choosing a favorite book is sort of an impossible task. The books that we love are so influenced by the people we are at the time we read them, I think. when, in high school, if you'd asked me what my favorite book was, it would be a different answer than when I was in college, and a different answer than I was in my late 20s. Some of the books that I love, I would say, I mentioned The Corrections by Franzen. That was a big one for me. I love a book called London Fields by the late author Martin Amis. He is he was a very talented comedic writer, and that book is excellent. A lot of people haven't read it. I love classics. I love The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. I always say that's my favorite New York book. As a former New Yorker, I guess you're always a New Yorker. I say that's my favorite New York book. I love books that capture a different time than that we're in, and like for me, especially when I was younger, the work of Bret Easton Ellis was really influential. His writing is so spare and just different, and it's so evocative of the 1980s, which is the decade that I was born, but I have a fascination with as well. And a big influence on Ellis was Joan Didion, and I'm a huge fan of her work as well. Both the nonfiction, I think, Slashing Towards Bethlehem is a great collection, but I love Play It As It Lays. Her first novel, I think, or second novel rather, is fantastic as well for really just spare, tough piece of fiction. In terms of what people read here in Falmouth, I think it's pretty, all over the place. We have a lot of people who love to read, the most popular fiction, the authors that you always think about as some of the most prolific and popular authors, like Patterson and Baldacci and Harlan Coben and those characters. But we see a lot of literary fiction as well. We see a lot of people reading. One of the most popular books we've seen over the last few months is The Women by Kristen Hanna, I believe. That is doing really well, and we just started a new book discussion group here, which is our popular fiction book discussion group. So usually book discussion groups are, books that have been out for a little while, because it takes us a while to get copies of it or whatever. So our new managing librarian for adult services is trying out something where we basically lease copies of these super hot titles that are hard to get a hold of, and we do a book discussion while those books are still hot, while those are still the ones that everyone wants to read. So they just had a discussion of The Women the other night, and that's a tough book to keep on the shelf. So I think that's a really cool idea, to try and capture that sort of moment when everybody wants to read it, and try and get people together here in the library to read that stuff. My kids, my son is always interested in a few very specific sort of characters. So he's very into Transformers. He loves anything Lego oriented. So if I bring home a book about the Transformers, which I did the other day, I'm a hero. For me, like, part of the hardest part of your kids getting older is when they leave past interests that used to be so passionate about behind. So my son was a huge truck enthusiast from basically age 2 to 4, and now, occasionally I'll bring him a truck book, and he's like, "Dad, I don't really want this," But he's sweet, and he'll be like, "Oh, cool," and we'll read it once, and then it won't get read again. But my daughter, she is pretty content with anything. She loves characters as well, so like Bluey, Pinkalicious, and I try to sprinkle in a little bit more of the higher art picture books and whatnot, but I think the most important thing is reading to kids, right? You want to engage them, you want them to be excited about what you're offering to them. So I don't get too prescriptive. If my kids want to read about Transformers and Bluey, I think that's great. That's what we'll do. And I'll try and steer them occasionally into something that's a little bit more, I don't know, legitimate or whatever, but at the end of the day, whatever they like is what we'll read. We manage an operating budget of over $2 million. A significant chunk of that, about 13% of it, has to be spent every year on materials for the library. So that ranges from everything from the books that you see behind me to Chromebooks that we loan out to the public, and everything in between. That's required by the state of Massachusetts for us to get state aid. And so that's a really fun part of the job, because we get to sort of think about what it is that the library should have, that the town of Falmouth and the residents of Falmouth want from their library. And so those are some things that, have changed over the years, I think. It's one of the most interesting parts of the job, is seeing how library usage changes. One area that I think you'll see a lot of change, or that we've seen a lot of change in, is the way people use audiobooks. So historically, we think of audiobooks as big sort of bricks of CDs that you would come to the library and check out and bring home and play in a CD player, but not many folks have a CD player anymore. It's almost impossible to buy a car these days with a CD player, and I feel like cars were the last sort of stand for CD players. So, just looking at the statistics of our usage over the last year, we've seen a dramatic increase in the use of e-audiobooks. So those are ebooks that you download through the Libby app or the Hoopla app. Those numbers are up about 7,000 circulations in the past year. At the same time, we've seen a decline in the use of physical audiobooks, so the CDs that you would come into the library and get. So that's an area where we see changes, and you'll probably start to see fewer and fewer of those CDs in the library, but more and more of the e-audiobooks available through those apps that you use to access them. The other thing that I think we're really focused on right now is making sure that everyone feels welcome at the library, that the library has something for everyone. We're always interested in providing great service and resources to the folks who already love the library and use it. But I think we're really thinking about who isn't using the library, why aren't they using the library, and how can we make the library more useful to them, so maybe that they become library users as well. For the first time, we are offering free copying. So people don't have to pay for this. It used to be 20 cents a page. We want a philosophy that we sort of subscribe to here is that we really do want the library to be truly a free place. So when you come in here, we don't really want money to be involved. So copying is now free, and next year we anticipate moving to free printing as well. I mean, obviously this comes out of the library's budget and whatnot, but we think that if we can provide these things to folks, 20 cents here and there probably doesn't seem like a lot to anybody, but it adds up, and oftentimes the people using these resources don't have a lot of expendable income. So we just want to make sure that when people come here, they can use all the resources of the library as much as they need to without it being a regressive tax. So the Friends set a record. This year they took in over $81,000 at the book sale this year. So the previous record, I believe, was $77,000. So they topped it by a good margin. Most of it was in the first day. I think they did over $40,000 of business just in the first day of the book sale, which is remarkable. But you hear from people, people start calling us as early as March or April. When's the book sale going to be? And people plan their whole vacations around coming to Falmouth, so they're here for that book sale. It's that sort of big an event for folks, and I mean, it is just amazing the amount of work they do, the donations that they pull together all through the year, the sorting that they do, making sure that everything they put out there is quality. It's just amazing. I mean, I picked up a number of books for my kids. Great place to get very reasonably priced Transformer books. Let's put it that way. So. Yeah, they did a great job. The Friends support so much of what the library does. Our children's programming budget, our branch programming budget, all of the museum passes that you can get through the library, those are all paid for by the Friends. They support a lot of what I do at the correctional facility. When I need to buy books to fill requests, when I can't get something as a donation or through the donation stream, sometimes books that folks are looking for are a little bit more obscure. and I'll go out and I'll buy them used, usually on Amazon or something like that. And so the Friends gave me a small budget to sort of fulfill those requests, which is really great. So the Friends do so much. They're a really wonderful group. Yeah, so the operating budget is really what the town gives us, and that's for the operations of the building, right? The electricity that, we have to pay for the materials that you see on the shelves, the salaries and wages. All of that stuff is the town budget. The Friends, support the library, through an allocation. I mean, they have sort of a soft budget. It's not a hard, this is what you have to spend and you don't get any more. We sort of set a wish list or a goal. We say, we think we're going to have these expenses for museum passes. We're going to set this target for children's programming. We're going to set this target for branch programming. But it's all, that part of it is sort of movable, right? It's malleable. The operating budget, that's a hard budget, right? No negotiation there. It is what it is. If somehow we exceeded it, we'd have to go to finance committee and ask for, and tell them why, and it wouldn't be pretty. So that, we're very disciplined on, but the Friends are great and the trustees are great. The trustees pay for programming for adults and young adults as well. They're great because we can go to them and say, we want to do this really cool thing. It's not going to really fit within sort of what we've made the budget out to be, but would you be interested in helping us out? And they always say yes, basically, because they understand their role is to support, the great work that the staff does here. So we have that. We have the trustees, as I said, who support that. And then we have the support fund, which is another area that we can sort of tap for big programs that we want to do. The support fund does things like some of the concerts you've seen on the lawn. They support that. The Great Decisions program we do, which is sort of a current events program, which is really fantastic. The reading garden that we have out of the East Falmouth branch, that was funded in large part by the support fund. So we're very lucky. The library enjoys an incredible amount of support from the community that's, just that provides us the platform to do what we do, but we also do have all of these wonderful organizations that provide the financial backing that allow us to think big and deliver library services that I think the town, expects and deserves. We do get state aid. Yeah, so state aid is awarded every year, and that's what our statistical reporting and financial reporting that we're currently going through right now is for. So we have to do a report every year called the ERIS report, which is, basically where we report to the state our circulation numbers, our attendance numbers, how many books we have, everything. It's basically a statistical snapshot of the library over the last fiscal year. And that, in combination with some financial reporting that we do a little bit later on in the year, go into sort of a package that determines our state aid award. So that award comes to us from the state, usually in January. And then it's sort of given to us in two parts, January and March. We are fully staffed at this point for the first time in over a year. We have 36 staff members, and they are spread out among the three branches that we call Falmouth Public Library. So you've got the main library here on Main Street, but also East Falmouth and North Falmouth as well. We have a few different divisions within the library. So public services is sort of our frontline staff that you see sort of at the checkout desks and whatnot. That's our biggest department or division, as we would call it. Then you've got adult services, and those are the folks who design a lot of the programming for adults, as well as help with a lot of technology issues people might have and handle reference questions. And then youth services, obviously, are the folks who work with the kids and do all the children's programming and select materials for children. Young adults tend to be sort of the demographic that gets left behind in library services, historically speaking at least. We focus a lot of energy on kids and sort of fostering that love of reading and programming for kids and whatnot, but as kids get older and they age out of that children's space, a lot of times libraries didn't have a great setup for keeping them engaged as teens. So this library, I was very fortunate to come in here, and they already had a really robust teen space. I think we're definitely interested in continuing to build this. Clint's done some really great stuff with purchasing books in world languages, so Portuguese, Spanish, some very popular titles that we have, a world language collection for this demographic, in addition to the world languages that we have for adults. Then we have technical services, which you don't see a lot of, but does such important work for making our collections accessible to people. They're the ones who handle the acquisitions of the materials that come into the library, make sure they're cataloged properly so that you can find them when they go into the library catalog and when they go out onto the shelves, as well as handling a lot of our digital resources as well. So much of the Falmouth sort of documentation that we have from the last century of the town, municipal sort of government and everything else, we have so many documents that aren't digital, and so technical services has played a huge role in digitizing a lot of town reports, yearbooks from the high school, really just doing excellent work there. And then we have our branch services staff who primarily are responsible for making sure the branches are running smoothly as well. I think an important thing that libraries can do is be adaptive and responsive to the community's needs. And that's both in the spaces that we have here, as well as our collections. I think that, historically libraries had this sort of role in communities as being the place where you could go to get information on pretty much every subject under the sun, right? But then this thing was invented that does that really well, called the internet. And so the internet is such a great resource for getting information on just about anything you can imagine. And I think as AI really develops and in the next 5 years probably gets very, very good at providing access to sort of basic information very quickly, I think that you'll see that become an even more prevalent resource for folks. So I think it's important that the library maybe stop thinking that it has to be a place that has books about every single thing, and maybe starts looking at what do people want from it, and really using that as its guiding sort of principle for collection development. That's going to mean more copies of popular books. So we want to reduce the amount of time people have to wait for those big books that everybody wants. It means that we'll be very thoughtful about the materials that we select, so that we want to make sure that we're buying things that people actually want to look at. We're going to be looking at what we buy, and if nobody ever checks it out, maybe that means that we need to pivot more toward looking at what people are actually using and making sure those collections are representative of what people actually want to use when they come to the public library. The other piece of that is really making sure that the space is a space that people can use, that they want to be in, that it's not just a place where people come get something and walk out of. I have the opportunity to do these library tours that we mostly do in the off season, more or less every month. And folks can just sign up and come in and walk around the library with me and talk about the library, and it's a conversation, right? And something I hear often is, I didn't know this was here. I didn't know about that, or, and so a lot of times that's because people come in and they pick up their book that's on hold, or they come in to print something out, and then they just leave. And we want to make this a space where you actually hang out. There's so few spaces that people can be in a community that are totally free, that nothing's expected of you other than to, keep your shoes on. And I think that, I want people to use this space more. I want them to be here. So I think you'll start to see more seating for folks, more space to work. Remote work is more common now than certainly was before the pandemic, and I don't think that's going to go away. So I think in some of our spaces you'll see better options for working for longer periods of time. And I think, you'll start to see some really interesting, innovative programming. We have really excellent staff who are thinking about not only the things that already do really well here at the library in terms of programs that get a lot of big numbers, but we want to start taking some risks, doing some things that maybe we haven't done before. An excellent example of that is something we did this past June called Cape Cod, which was an all-day event organized by our young adult librarian, Clint Johnson. And it was sort of a celebration of comics and comic culture and anime and manga. And we had programming all throughout the library. We had all these guest speakers. And we encouraged people to come in dressed up as their favorite characters. And what we saw was, this was a big swing. We had never done anything like this before. And I'll admit, when Clint came to me with this idea, I said, I don't know, man, you don't have to take such a big swing. Clint's relatively new here, and I want him to get some successes under his belt before he took such a big shot. But Clint, said, I think this is going to be great, and I trusted his instinct on that. And we doubled the number of people who typically come into the library on a Saturday in the summer, which is usually around 600. That day we had over 1,200 people come into the library. So I think you're going to start seeing more stuff like that. We want to start doing things that maybe in the past we haven't done, or we want to be ambitious. We want to do things that are harder to pull off, but maybe are things that are really going to resonate with people. So keep an eye out for some of that stuff. I think there's going to be some really cool stuff. What's on my book table right now is an oral history of the television show The OC, which I was a big fan of when I was in college. We used to have watch parties for new episodes of The OC. So I saw this on the shelf actually just randomly here in our new nonfiction collection. I was like, oh my goodness, I have to read that book. Huge fan of Ryan Atwood and Seth Cohen, and so it's been a delight revisiting some of these characters I haven't thought about in a while. Falmouth is amazing in its support of the library. Looking at the numbers, we have about 15,000 registered borrowers here at the library, which is about half the population, which in 2024 is a really great number, but we don't want to be content with that. We're always looking to get more people signed up for a library card and getting them access to the collections that we have here and the programs and everything else that we do. So I'm just thrilled at the opportunity to further the mission of the library and work with all of the great people here in Falmouth who support this wonderful institution that's been going strong for over 100 years, and help support it and set it up for another 100 years of success.